Hello and welcome to the Rask Network. What you're about to hear and see is limited to general financial information only. Please be sure to speak to your financial planner or refer to our financial services guide available at rask.com.au/FSG before acting on the information.
Hello and welcome back to the Australian Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Kate Campbell, and today I've got expert guests in to talk about habits, productivity, and getting our health right. Because there's no point in having millions at retirement if we're not able to enjoy all of our hard work because of our health. Are you trapped in an endless cycle of unhealthy habits? Do you want to eat better, be more active, and sleep soundly, but struggle to make lasting changes? You're not alone. We all have unique psychological and situational barriers that sabotage our health goals. Today, I'm speaking with a previous finance podcast guest and psychologist, Dr Amantha Imber, about her newest book, The Health Habit. She's helped over 100,000 people at organizations such as Google, Apple, Disney, Lego, Deloitte, Atlassian, Visa. You'll recognize many of these names from companies we've discussed before on the podcast, and other organizations to help their employees improve their productivity, performance, and well-being worldwide. In this episode, we're talking about goal setting and habit change, getting our foundations right, and improving our overall well-being so we can live full of lives. Amantha shares plenty of hacks, tools, and strategies that are going to improve the way you live. Let's dive in. Amantha, welcome onto the podcast today.
It's good to be here, Kate.
Now, you have just published a book. It's been going really well. It's all about health and habits and living a full and important life. Now, on your website, you've got a list of all of these hacks to 10 times our work and our life. I thought we could just start there if you can share some of your favorites with us.
Well, one of my favorites is the idea of working to our chronotype. And I find that most people haven't come across the idea of a chronotype. So very simply, this is about how individually we're all a little bit different in terms of the peaks and troughs of our energy levels over a 24-hour period. And broadly speaking, there are three categories. So some of us are what chronotype researchers would call larks, so stereotypical morning people. If you wake at 5:30 a.m. without an alarm, you're probably a lark. Then there are owls. It's about 1 in 5 people are owls. They come to life at night or in the sort of evening time. And then the rest of us are middle birds, so people that run on the schedule of a lark, just delayed by a couple of hours. So if you wake up at maybe 7 a.m. or thereabouts, naturally, you're probably a middle bird. Now, what we know about chronotypes is that larks and middle birds have their cognitive peak, so do their best thinking in the morning, whereas owls are the opposite. For me, I'm a lark, so typically my peak brain power hours are between about 7 or 8 a.m. till about 10 or 11 a.m. And so since learning about chronotypes, I like to do what I call playing offense rather than defense with how I think about my work days. So instead of just being at the mercy of meetings being put at my diary and checking emails at all hours, I instead try to prioritize my deep focused work for before lunchtime. I rarely accept meetings before lunch. And then in the afternoon, when my brain power is less at its peak, that's when I'll do either more shallow work, like getting into my inbox, or doing meetings that don't require as much brain power. And that would be like the biggest game changer that I have experienced in terms of my work output and productivity.
It's a good one to note because so often we just let work happen to us and people just chuck in meetings everywhere. We don't allow ourselves any time to actually do some deep work, to focus, to really work and study at the time that suits us best.
Absolutely. I often, like part of my role is to go into organizations and help them work more productively. And something I hear from so many people is they feel like their days are like a game of whack-a-mole where they're just trying to, hammer everything down. But then as soon as they deal with one issue, another one pops up, and our days are so reactive. And it's really easy to get sidetracked from our goals and the things that matter most to us when we're feeling like we're playing whack-a-mole. So for me, thinking about how can I play offense rather than defense with how I'm structuring my day and the work that I'm choosing to do has just led to the biggest improvement in productivity.
Do you find structuring your days in all areas of your life helps you be less reactive?
What I find very helpful is using time blocking as a strategy. So, we're all used to booking meetings where we're discussing something with someone else, but what about for the work that only relies on us? Like I imagine, Kate, preparing for this podcast interview obviously takes some time and you're putting together an interview brief. But really that's probably work that you're doing solo. And I know, for my podcast, How I Work, that's typically solo work. And so instead of just having it as a to-do list item, I'll actually book a meeting with myself to get the work done. So again, it's being really mindful and deliberate with how I'm using the hours in my day rather than just having this to-do list that I'll, randomly pick things from, which is ultimately flawed because as humans, we're inherently lazy. And so we naturally are attracted to the to-do list items that are easy and quick to do, which ultimately never corresponds to the work that matters and is going to shift us closer to where we want to be.
Yeah, the thing about time blocking, if you don't give yourself a realistic amount of time in your calendar, because at the very beginning I was just putting everything in as half an hour and hour slots, just sort of letting the calendar automatically populate. And then I was realizing, okay, this task actually takes 3 hours. So it just completely lost the progress for the whole day. So being realistic is important.
Yes. And I would say a couple of things on that, Kate. So I got some really good advice when I interviewed Cal Newport on How I Work. So Cal, who I'm sure you're familiar with, wrote the book Deep Work along with a whole lot of other brilliant books. And he gave me the advice. He said, we are bad at estimating how long something will take. Although the more often we start to time box our work, the better we do get at estimating. But as a general rule, if you're just starting off doing this, just estimate how long you think something will take and double it. And that's what you put in the diary.
Imagine if we had to do that for any savings goal, like the holiday, double it.
Yeah.
Now, you've interviewed a lot of really interesting people on your podcast, How I Work. I was wondering, having the chance to go inside the brain of all these cool people from around the world in business, music, entrepreneurs, all sorts of things, are there any really interesting stories or anecdotes that have stuck with you to this day?
Oh, gosh. I mean, so many. Probably a couple. Look, one that I think about a lot, and this came from Professor Adam Alter, who's at the Stern School of Business at NYU, and he's a psychologist. And we spoke about the idea of goal setting, which I think is really interesting. So Adam's view on goal setting is that it is inherently flawed, which is quite controversial because I'm sure that, even on this podcast, you talk about smart goal setting and, how important it is to have goals when it comes to your finances. But what Adam's view is that the thing with a goal is that you set a goal. And let's just take, a really simple example. Like, let's just take a weight loss goal. I'm sure that, many people have at various times in their life had the goal to just lose that final 5 kilos, let's say. But the thing with the goal, as soon as you set the goal, you are failing. And you're failing and failing and failing, and you're in a state of failure until you hit that goal. And then what happens when you hit the goal? You go, yeah, I hit the goal. And then you set another goal. And then you're back in a failure state, which is ultimately very demotivating. And so what Adam's approach is yes, he'll have an end state that he's trying to get to. And he gave me the example of, Adam has written a few New York Times best-selling books. And so let's just say he's got an end goal that he needs to write 70,000 words for the first draft of a manuscript. So yes, we've got an end point in mind, but he will think about what is the daily system that if he sticks to that will get him to that goal. And I think there are a lot of parallels here with goals like, say, around, budgeting and savings goals and those sorts of things in the world of finance, but certainly in the world of productivity and also health, thinking about what is a daily system that you can stick to and feel successful every day when you're sticking to it that will ultimately get you to that goal. And that is something that deeply impacted me and the way I think about goals in the context of work and also life goals and financial goals. And it just changed the way I think about, how I structure, that side of my life and when I'm aiming towards something.
So you're sort of reverse planning the goal in a way. So you still need a general direction of where you want to head, because I guess it's quite hard to come up with your daily system if you don't know that you want to save $1,000, then you don't know what the daily step should be.
Exactly. So you still need a clear end point, but focus on the daily system as opposed to the goal itself. Because if you set the right daily system, you will get to that end point.
That could be a really interesting thing for people to try when it comes to their saving, because I haven't really thought about it in the concept of like failing, hit the goal, set a new one. But I guess for people that it does feel like you're failing on the way to reaching a goal, or you don't feel like you're making progress, then maybe this is a different approach that you could try, and this might help you reach your goal more successfully next time.
Definitely.
Now, in your book, The Health Habit, that's recently come out, you talk about 3 of the essential foundations for our health, which are sleep, exercise, and nutrition. Why do you believe it's so important to pay attention to these areas of our lives and make small progress every day on these?
Well, I think the fact is that most people, or many people, off the back of the pandemic and wars and the cost of living and the stress of the economic environment right now, it's like people are exhausted. And certainly with statistics that I was reading recently, and this was some research that was done by Deloitte globally, it found that 43% of workers are feeling constantly exhausted. And I think when we're exhausted, I mean, there's so much focus on mental health. And obviously, as a psychologist, mental health is critical. But I feel like there's not enough of the conversation being had around our physical health, which really sets the foundation for how we can be in work and in life. If we are not sleeping properly, I mean, we can have the best intentions and the smartest goals in the world, but if we're lacking in sleep, our performance is going to be severely compromised. Likewise, if we're not eating in a way that sustains our energy, life is so much harder. And if we are not moving, I mean, certainly there's been so much research to show the huge impact that exercise has on all sorts of factors, including our mental well-being.
I'm going to deviate slightly, but I feel like it was in your book or maybe in one of your guides, you debunked the 10,000 steps a day myth, which I thought was quite funny.
Yes. So the 10,000 steps a day idea actually comes from a Japanese marketing campaign that happened several decades ago. There is absolutely no science behind it. There is only a marketing idea behind it. Now, when actual scientists have researched how many steps per day should we ideally aim for when it comes to improving our health and improving longevity, and this is where they have looked at thousands and thousands of people and how many steps they're doing per day and looked at what are then the chances of premature death, so looked at mortality rates. What these researchers have landed on is that actually the ideal number of steps that we need to take for to optimize our health every day is 7,500 steps. It's after 7,500 steps that the benefits tend to plateau. So if you are a 10,000 steps a day kind of person and you beat yourself up, if your smartwatch pedometer doesn't say 10,000 steps at the end of the day, scrap that goal. There's no science behind it. Instead, aim for 7,500 steps per day.
I love that. Are there any other sort of things that we have in our brains about health, whether it's sleep, exercise, nutrition, that have actually just come from marketing and they're more myths than factual?
Oh, there are. I mean, let's take the amount of hours that we need to sleep. So typically, most sleep campaigns are funded by pharmaceutical companies marketing sleeping tablets. And the messages that we hear in the media are typically we need between 7 to 9 hours sleep per night. 8 hours seems to be this magic number that most people would have in their heads. But if we look at the majority of marketing campaigns that feed us that message, they're funded by pharmaceutical companies that make sleeping pills. We know that even just taking sleeping pills infrequently actually increases mortality rates. It leads to significantly increases our chance of dying prematurely. So wherever possible, try to avoid sleeping tablets. But what researchers have found when they've actually looked at what is the ideal number of hours sleep that we need per night, again, looking at what number of hours sleep relates to the lowest mortality rates, 7 hours is what's emerged. So quite a bit less than what we're being told. So again, where there's a mismatch between what marketers are feeding out to us versus what science is telling us.
Yeah, that's interesting because we do learn a lot about our health and things like that just from what our friends and family tell us and what the media tells us. So having books like yours that actually look into the research and talk to the people that are on the ground doing the research that aren't funded by particular organizations with incentives involved is especially important, and it's something that we all have to take a little bit of individual action on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's critical. Go to the research and not the marketers.
Same with finance as well. When it comes to those key elements of sleep, exercise, and nutrition, do you have any small suggestions that we can take each day to work on those areas? Because as a whole, they seem very much like, well, I don't really know what to do to improve those areas of my life.
So in the health habit, I do break it down to between 5 to 7 daily health habits that you can adopt for each of those areas, sleep, movement, and nutrition, that will have a really big impact. And for the book, I tried to find strategies that were lesser well known, because no one needs to be told again, don't scroll on your phone before bed. We all know that. But
We all
also
do it,
strategies,
though.
we all do it. This is very true. But I wanted to find strategies that were highly impactful, but really being underutilized. So, I'll share a couple from sleep, because I feel like so many people, really struggle with getting a good night's sleep most nights of the week. So one thing that's absolutely critical with sleep and will have a really, really big impact is wake up at the same time every day, which sounds very simple, but most people don't do it. What tends to happen is that people will wake up at a certain time between Monday to Friday for work, and typically that's an earlier hour. And then on Saturday and Sunday, they'll have a bit of a sleep in, and it might only be an hour or two. And they'll think, well, that doesn't matter. But what is actually happening come Monday when you're waking up, let's say 2 hours earlier, is that essentially you're giving yourself jet lag every Monday morning. It's kind of like traveling from Melbourne, where you and I are based, to Auckland, New Zealand every weekend, and dealing with the subsequent jet lag every Monday morning. And then by the time Friday comes around, we're sort of over the jet lag, and then we're sleeping in on the weekend, and then we're just repeating that cycle. So we are really placing a huge toll on our body and our body clock and our energy levels through making that choice of just sleeping in just 1 or 2 hours. So that is absolutely something that is really important. Another little hack around sleep, and there's been some great research around it, is one of the best things that you can do to reset your body clock every morning is get out into natural light, even just for 5 or 10 minutes. What this does is that the outside light beams into our eyes, and essentially it signals to our brain that it is time to get alert and get with the program. It helps get over any sleep inertia, like that grogginess that most of us feel when we wake up, which is perfectly normal. And then it resets our body clock to, wake up and then get tired at a similar point in time at night, so that we can be as consistent as possible. So there are a couple of strategies.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because we all sleep. Sleep's super important to us, but often we don't think about all of those habits that surround our sleep. I've heard it referred to before as like sleep hygiene.
Yes. So sleep hygiene. I mean, there are plenty of things that I could talk about there in terms of having good sleep hygiene. But yeah, it is just having those good habits to give yourself the best chance of having a really good quality night's sleep.
Now, a lot of these habits, they're fantastic to learn about, but there's usually a huge gap between learning about them right now when you're listening to this podcast and taking action. And that's something that impacts us in all areas of our lives. So like when it comes to our finances, we can learn a lot about investing, but taking action is a whole different skill set. So what are some of the reasons why we find it so hard to take what we're learning right now about our sleep habits or walking and things like that and put it into action in our lives?
It's a great question. And for me, I feel like this is what is lacking from a lot of health and wellbeing books that are on the market. And it was the main thing that motivated me to create the Health Habit book, in that I wanted to research what are the biggest, most impactful health habits that we could adopt in our lives. But importantly, and particularly as a psychologist, I wanted to understand, well, if like there are so many health books published every year, every month, like, if any of them actually led to permanent behavior change, there would be no market for health books. And so I wanted to explore what are the most common psychological barriers that stand in the way of us making a permanent change? Because certainly we know, from psychological research that knowing something is not enough to actually change the behavior. And that's very important. So the book diagnoses what are the 4 main barriers that get in the way of change, and then has several different, what I call habit heroes, ways that you can overcome these barriers to give your health habits the best chance of sticking. So I can go into the 4 most common barriers that stand in the way. So briefly, they are firstly, motivational barriers. So this is where you feel like you have to make a change instead of wanting to make a change. Maybe your doctor has said, you need to lose weight or do exercise. Otherwise, you're a heart attack waiting to happen. Or maybe your spouse is on your back or something like that to make a change. So you feel like you have to, but you're not feeling all that motivated. So that's the first barrier. Second barrier is relational, where perhaps the social norms in your life are encouraging you to act in a certain way. Like, let's just say your household, big fans of sugary snacks and your pantry is laden with them. And that is just the style of meals and food that your household enjoys. So perhaps the social norms are getting in the way. So relational barriers. Then thirdly, there might be environmental barriers where the physical environment where we work or live and play is actually making it hard for us to make a change. Like, we talked about scrolling on our phone before bed. If your phone charger is next to your bed, that is an environmental barrier that is standing in the way of you making a better change to your sleep hygiene. And then finally, cognitive barriers or cognitive hijackers, where if you're feeling exhausted or really stressed or burnt out, when you're in that mental state, it's really hard to make a permanent change. So the book helps diagnose which of those 4 is the most relevant for you, and then has several strategies to help you make your habits stick.
Do one of these come up more than the others for people?
I would say, and again, looking at the data, cognitive barriers and environmental barriers tend to be the most common.
Can you take us through, if we realize it's an environmental barrier, like say that's holding us back, and maybe it's the phone next to the bed is probably an easy example to pick on, whether people enjoy that or not, I don't know. I still scroll before bed sometimes, and I tried moving my phone to charge in the study, so it doesn't always work. But maybe can you take us through, if we identify that's our barrier for making a change that we want to make, what are some of the things we can do about it?
So yeah, let's have a look at environmental barriers. And one of the biggest strategies here that can be a real game changer is to disrupt the default. So we want to think about what's the behavior or the habit that we want to create or maybe eliminate in some cases, and how could we redesign our physical environment to just make the thing that we're trying to do just really natural to do. So let's just take our phone. Like, let's just say, we've got a goal around, certainly not scrolling before bed, but, maybe just reducing the amount of hours that we are scrolling on social media, for example. So, a really easy example is to move your phone charger into a different room, and ideally far away from your bedroom. So that's a really good strategy. Another thing that we can think about is, again, if it's about mobile phone usage, thinking about how many minutes during the day is your phone more than arm's length away from you. For a lot of people, that is 0 minutes.
I can see one right here.
Yeah, there you go. And I can see I've actually got it on my desk here. So what we can do there is, again, we can change the environment. We can break the default. So perhaps the default is that your phone lives in a different room to where you work, for example. Or if you're trying to cut down phone usage during family time, during dinner, put the phones in a different room. So it's changing, what is that default? Because if my phone is within arm's reach, the natural thing to do is to just check my phone on a whim. So that's one thing that we can do differently, redesign our physical environment.
Yeah, even just doing things like leaving a book in different places around the house, it sort of prompts me to, instead of just grabbing my phone when I've got 5 minutes to kill before I have to leave for the train, I can just pick up that book and keep reading from where I left off. Or even just things to go for short walks around the block. The idea of just lacing up your shoes seems like it's a whole activity now. So I got not sort of for this purpose, but I got Skechers that don't have laces. They just slip-ons. And it is so easy. And I find myself doing a lot more 10-minute walk around the block because it doesn't seem like you have to get ready to go for a walk. You just slip on the Skechers and off you go. So it's a very random example, but I found it worked and it has changed my habits.
I love that example, Kate. It reminds me, I've heard about a few people that say want to get into the habit of going for a morning walk or doing their exercise first thing in the morning. What they've started to do is they've started to sleep in their exercise clothes so that the default when they wake up is to do exercise because they're already dressed. I've also heard about a lot of home-based workers, or if you're a hybrid and on the days where you are working from home, is dress in athleisure wear and have sneakers on your feet. Because again, the default then is that it's really effortless to go for a walk around the block because you're already dressed for, physical activity.
How much does what we're wearing play a role in our habits as well? Because I know some people say that if you want to get into like work or study or like deep focus mode, you should be wearing a certain attire or glasses or things that get you into the zone.
I would say that it's more about the cues. So certainly what we're wearing can be a cue, but there are all sorts of other cues that we might use. So for example, something that I use when I'm doing my deep work sprints. So every morning I'll try to do at least 1 to 2, if not more hours of deep focused work, is that I've started to cue that with my morning coffee. So I'm a 1 cup a day person and I will make myself a coffee and I'll go up to my home office and I'll have my coffee, I open up my laptop and I start my work. And it's almost Pavlovian. It's like I've got my coffee, I'm at my computer, I'm at my workstation. So that in my mind means it's time to work. So, it is thinking about what are those environmental cues that we can start to associate with a certain type of state. So for some people, what we wear can be really helpful, but there can be other things that we can manipulate there as well.
Yeah, I found even having rules, like every Saturday morning I go for a run. That's just a rule, unless it's maybe pouring with rain. So I don't actually have to make a decision of, am I going to run this weekend? I run on Saturday with my running group and it makes it a lot easier. It takes some of that decision fatigue away.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great strategy if you've got cognitive barriers at play. Like if you're feeling really exhausted, just having those rules in place, psychologists would refer to that as an implementation intention, essentially like a rule that you've got in place. Like, at 9 a.m. Saturday, I do this. I go for a walk with my friends or I go to spin class or whatever that rule might be, because it takes the decision out of the equation. And when we're tired, and we're trying to make a decision, we'll always take the path of least resistance.
Now, I've heard a lot of different timeframes, but how long does it usually take us to form a habit? Say we're wanting to go for a 10-minute walk around the block every morning. How long until it's automatic?
There has been research that has looked into this. What they have found is that there's huge variation, but on average, the answer is 66 days. So it's about 2 months to make something permanent, although the variance in that research, it can be as short as a couple of weeks to as long as I think it was about 250 days or thereabouts. So it's a big range. So, there are so many 21 and 28 day programs out there that you would think, again, you would trust the marketers and go, surely it takes 21 or 28 days to change a habit. But no, 66 on average is the scientific answer.
And then sometimes you create the habit. So there's something you have to do twice a day, like brush your teeth, but you still have to go. You still have to find the time. You still have to go, oh, I've got to do it before I leave the house and things like that. So it doesn't just sort of happen without you thinking about it. You still have to put a little bit of thought in.
Yeah. Ideally with habits, it does become automatic. And I think, for most of us, we can identify, there are things that I just do automatically. And some of those things are good for us, like brushing our teeth, and other types of activities are not that good for us, like scrolling through Instagram or TikTok for, maybe more time than we would like. So yeah, which is where, the different behavior change strategies can play a big role in shaping your behavior in a way that is optimal for you.
So if someone listening to this is going, okay, this week I want to try starting a new habit that's going to be really positive for me. Maybe it's about moving each day or getting a bit more sleep or having my phone in the other room. Do you have some strategies to start a new habit?
So the first thing to do is to work out what is the psychological barrier that's getting in the way? Is it motivational? Is it relational? Is it environmental, or is it cognitive? And I can send you a link to put in the show notes so that people can assess that. There's also an assessment in the Health Habit book. So once they found that out, it really is aligning a behavior change strategy with the barrier that's getting in the way. So we've talked about a few. There's plenty more in the Health Habit book, but it really is going, okay, based on my individual barrier or habit hijacker, as I call them, thinking about, okay, what's a behavior change strategy that I can match to that? Because there is no like one size fits all to changing our behavior.
Yeah, I think that's probably something you have to approach it quite like an experiment. So one thing might not work, but something else might.
Absolutely. I think having an experimental mindset is so important, and it takes the emotion away from failure and beating yourself up. 'Cause it's like, well, it's an experiment and anyone can run a 7-day experiment and try something for 7 days. And like a scientist, observe what's happened. What have you learned and what can you adjust and try differently in the next experiment?
Have you found any research on whether all those habit tracking apps that everyone can download, so many of them on the App Store, do they actually work?
Well, yes and no. I haven't seen, I've seen some research, and certainly with some of those habit tracking apps, they set up some form of accountability. Like they either encourage you to make a public pledge, to say the community online. Some will pair you up with an accountability buddy. And those are two very effective strategies, particularly if there's a relational barrier at play. And also, like if you're someone that relates to being a people pleaser, having an accountability buddy, someone that you share your goal with and keeps you accountable, or making a public pledge, which could be through one of these habit change apps or communities, or even, posting your goal on social media. There's a lot of research that either of those strategies will have a very big impact on your likelihood of sticking to any kind of behavior change.
Okay, so it's more what the components of the app is and what sort of systems are in there, rather than just it works or it doesn't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, because some of them you just go in and press a button every day to say you've done the thing. So I don't know if that works. Like I have downloaded a lot of them. I haven't stuck with any of them.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's research behind the idea of a streak board where, doing the same thing every day, it's like you don't want to break the chain. But then there's also research to talk about the benefit of hall passes, where essentially giving yourself a couple of hall passes, like 2 days off a week, where if you don't stick to that habit, it overcomes what psychologists call the what the hell effect. So, you might have had that experience of maybe you're starting a new health kick and you're going really well Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then Thursday too, then Friday hits, and, you're out for dinner with work colleagues, or you're having drinks, and, you're having things that maybe weren't on the ideal list in terms of what you were trying to do. And then you just go, oh, what the hell? I might as well just have like a full dessert and, gobble up lots of food, for example. And then you kind of fall off the wagon. But with having hall passes and saying to yourself, I'm going to give myself a couple of days off during the week at, whatever days I decide, researchers have found that little psychological trick will significantly impact the chances of you sticking to your goal.
Well, there you go. Because a lot of people do try to say, I'm going to do this every single day, and I'm not going to give myself a day off or a hall pass, as you said.
Yeah. Yes, that is quite hard. And look, particularly if there's cognitive barriers at play, where you're, feeling stressed, exhausted, tired, that hall pass strategy can work incredibly well.
So it goes back to the done is better than perfect advice that everyone always talks about.
Yeah.
Pulling everything together that you've done in the research for the book, what are your top tips for us when it comes to our health, our career, our business this year in terms of having a healthier and more productive year?
Look, I think people don't obsess enough about their health. Health is the foundation for everything else. If you are lacking in energy, if you're feeling exhausted, it's impossible to perform at your best, whether that be in work or as in your role as a parent or a partner or a friend or a daughter or a son. You just simply can't. So I think I cannot emphasize enough obsess about your health. Think about how can you sleep better, how can you move more and move better, and how can you eat better to sustain energy, and life and everything to do with it is a whole lot better when you can improve your health.
And do you usually recommend people make one small change at a time with that?
I absolutely do. It can be very overwhelming, the whole area of health. Pick one change at a time, nail that, and then move on to the next.
I love it, Amantha. Now, if people want to grab a copy of your book, The Health Habit, or your previous one, Time Wise, and learn more all about this, where should they go?
Oh, look, just go to any bookstore, online or bricks and mortar. It is probably there on the virtual or physical shelf.
Wonderful. Well, I'll make sure I include links in the show notes to all of those resources that you've talked about today. Amantha, thank you so much for coming on the Australian Finance Podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.